At a wedding, one sentence ended the ceremony. Nobody noticed the old woman standing among the guests, until the bride whispered into a live microphone, "Can someone remove her? She's not family." The woman didn't argue. She didn't move. She just said quietly, "I came to bless my son." And then the groom spoke. "That is my mother." Everyone heard the slap, but no one knew why she didn't react. To understand that moment, we have to go back. Tund had made it in Lagos, the kind of success people respected without asking too many questions. The glass doors of his office reflected a man who knew how to belong. Tailored suit, steady voice, the careful confidence of someone who understood exactly which parts of himself the world rewarded. In meetings he spoke slowly and people listened. At dinners he laughed at the right moments and no one wondered where he came from. Even his accent had softened over the years, polished by boardrooms and air-conditioned rooms that smelled nothing like the red earth roads he once walked barefoot as a boy. His friends admired him, his colleagues trusted him, his fiancée adored him. Ada loved introducing him. She liked the approving nods from older men and the whispers from her friends saying she had chosen well. With Tund beside her, everything felt stable, a future already arranged into photographs, engagement, wedding, children, a house with a gate that opened quietly instead of creaking. He fit perfectly inside that picture, and he worked carefully to keep it that way. Whenever conversations turned to family, his answers stayed brief and tidy. "My father passed years ago. My relatives live outside the city." He never lied. He simply never continued. One evening, scrolling through the guest list, Ada asked casually, "Will your mother wear traditional attire or something modern for the ceremony?" The question lingered longer than she expected. Tund looked at the list instead of at her. "We'll handle that later," he said, already shifting to another topic: venue timing, catering, anything measurable. He told himself it was temporary, that there would be a proper moment, that explanations required preparation. Weeks passed and the list grew longer, but one name was never added. Sometimes his phone lit up late at night, a number saved years ago. He let it ring until the screen went dark, placing it face down as if silence itself could finish conversations he refused to start. He didn't hate her. Hatred would have been easier, loud, hot, simple. What he carried was quieter, a feeling that lived beneath every introduction, every handshake, every approving smile in rooms she would never enter. In Lagos, Tund had built a life that explained his present perfectly. It just never explained his beginning. He did not resent his mother. He was ashamed of her. She used to sell things at the market when Tund was little, small, ordinary things that kept a household alive. Tomatoes piled in shallow bowls, dried pepper wrapped in paper, sachets of water stacked like bricks in a plastic crate. Some mornings it was gari and beans. Other days cloth pins and phone cards, whatever she could afford to buy in bulk and turn into profit by sunset. She spoke English the way many women in their part of Nigeria did, carefully, sparingly, with the rhythm of Yoruba and pidgin beneath it, not the smooth Lagos English teachers praised. When she tried to sound proper, the words came out stiff, like shoes that didn't fit. Most of the time she didn't bother. She spoke as she always had, because her life had never required permission to be understood. Her clothes were simple, a wrapper faded from too many washes, a headscarf tied tight the way she tied it when she was ready to work, plastic sandals that slapped stubbornly against the ground. She never wore perfume, only the smell of sun and pepper and sweat. The honest scent of a woman who had been carrying more than her own life for a long time. When Tund was small, none of it embarrassed him. He remembered sitting beside her stall with his knees pulled to his chest, watching her hands move quickly, counting money, tying knots, smoothing wrinkles from fabric. He remembered how she would press a coin into his palm for bread and whisper, "Go, don't let your teacher catch you chewing," then smile as if she had handed him the whole world. But childhood changes the rules without warning. The first time he felt it, he was about 10, old enough to notice the difference between his mother and the mothers at school. Their shoes looked cleaner. Their voices sounded different. Some arrived in cars with tinted windows. They wore dresses that didn't cling with heat. They spoke English as if it belonged to them. Tun said nothing that day. He just watched, and something inside him quietly rearranged itself. It began small, a flinch when she called his name too loudly in public, a quick glance around whenever she laughed, an urge to walk 2 steps ahead of her instead of beside her. Not hatred, never hatred. Just fear of being seen clearly. His friends teased him in ways that sounded like jokes but landed like stones. Your mama day market every day? Tund, she no get fine cloth? Why she day talk like that? They laughed. Tund laughed too, because laughing was easier than standing alone. At home, his mother either didn't notice or chose not to name it. Women like her learned early that naming a wound didn't always make it heal. She kept waking before dawn, preparing food, folding his uniform carefully, pressing her thumb against his forehead before he left. God will carry you, she would say. You will not be small, and he believed her. But belief didn't protect him from shame. One afternoon, the harm found its moment. It was break time. The sun was sharp, bleaching the courtyard white. Children ran and shouted. Tun stood with a group of boys near the wall, pretending he wasn't thirsty, just beginning to feel like he belonged. Then he heard it, his name, called the way only one person in the world said it. Not Tund like the teachers. Not Tunde like the boys trying to sound foreign, the real one. The one that carried home inside it. Tund. His stomach tightened before he turned. She stood near the gate, slightly hunched under the sun, wrapper tied at her waist, headscarf pulled back from sweat. In her hand was a small plastic bag. She lifted it when she saw him. I bring you food, she called, loud enough for heads to turn. You know chop this morning. I cook small. The boys stared at her, then at him. One smirked, another nudged his friend. Tund felt heat rush into his face. She smiled at him, open, proud, unguarded, the kind of smile that assumed she could not possibly be a problem. She waved again. Tund, come, take it. He could see the foil inside the bag, maybe rice, maybe a kara still warm. He could already smell it through the dust and heat. His body wanted to move toward her. But his pride moved faster. He looked at the boys, their sharp, waiting eyes. He imagined the laughter that would follow, the nicknames, the way belonging could be taken and never returned. And then he did something that would follow him long after childhood ended. He took one step back, not to ward her away. His gaze slid past her face as if she were a stranger in the wrong place. Her smile faltered, just slightly, like a light flickering before deciding whether to stay on. Tund? She called again, softer. Now you be that? He didn't answer. He turned his head toward the wall, pretending to listen to the boys, pretending she was not there. A quiet laugh slipped from one of them. It was enough. She stood still, holding the bag, searching his face as if she had misplaced something precious. Around her, children ran, teachers shouted, life moved without pause. For a moment, it seemed she might call again. But she didn't. She lowered her hand slowly, adjusted her wrapper with fingers that suddenly looked older, and turned back toward the gate. The plastic bag swung lightly at her side, still full. Tund watched her leave without changing his expression. His chest hurt in a way he didn't yet understand. Because that day, in that courtyard, beneath that sun, in front of those boys, was the first moment he ever refused her. He got accepted into a university in the city. The letter came folded and refolded in his hands until the creases softened. Tund read it 3 times under the dim light of their single bulb, afraid the words might change if he blinked. Then he ran outside barefoot, breathless, shouting the news into the compound like proof his life had finally begun. Friends slapped his back, neighbors clapped, someone said, "This one will make it." Another said, "His mother suffered." but not in vain. His mother stood in the doorway and listened. She didn't jump or scream or dance like other mothers. She simply pressed her palm to her chest as if holding her heart in place, and watched her son as though memorizing him. That night she cooked more than usual, not a feast. She couldn't afford one, but enough for the house to smell warm and full. She sat across from him while he ate, watching each bite like a prayer answered. When he finished, she rinsed the plate and said softly, "We will do it. You will go." Tund assumed they would manage. He didn't ask how. Boys rarely do. The weeks moved quickly. Forms, fees, lists, books, a mattress, trousers, shoes that wouldn't embarrass him. Every item felt like a door that cost money to open. Tund told himself it would be fine. His mother always found a way, turning the impossible into routine. He never noticed her eyes lingering on the land behind the house, a stubborn stretch of soil with tired plants, the last piece of his father that hadn't already been traded for survival. He didn't know she met men by the roadside speaking in low voices, or that she smoothed old papers on the floor from a tin box, negotiating for hours with people who expected her gratitude for little. When she returned home, she washed her hands longer than usual. Tund never noticed. By the time transport money was ready, admission fees paid, and his new clothes folded neatly into a small bag, he only felt relief. He thought she had simply found another way. He didn't know she had sold the last land. She didn't tell him. Telling him would make the sacrifice heavy, might make him hesitate. She needed him to leave believing he deserved it. The morning he left was cool before the sun remembered its duty. A bus waited at the roadside, engine coughing, paint chipped, already crowded with people and luggage. Women balanced baskets, men argued with conductors. A baby cried. A radio played softly as if the world was pretending normalcy. Tund stood in clothes she insisted he wear, clean, pressed, too fine for the dust around his feet, his small bag heavy with possibility. She moved around him quietly, adjusting his collar twice, smoothing his sleeve, pulling at seams as if erasing something invisible. He expected tears, dramatic goodbyes like in movies, mothers clinging so leaving felt like a funeral. But she was calm, not empty, just refusing emotion to interrupt purpose. When the conductor shouted for the last passengers, he shifted nervously and asked, "Mama, you're not crying?" For a moment something deep flickered in her eyes. Then she smiled, small, steady. She slipped a folded paper into his hand. "Call me when you reach. No be every day you forget your mother." He nodded quickly, throat tight, unwilling to look emotional before neighbors and strangers and the world already reshaping him. He picked up his bag. Then she spoke again, soft enough for only his spirit to hear. "Make sure your life is bigger than this place." The words landed heavy. He froze, then laughed lightly. "Of course. I'm not coming back here." He meant ambition, escape, greatness over struggle. She didn't correct him, only nodded slowly, as if she understood how boys translate love into pride. He boarded the bus, found a window seat, and as it jerked forward, he looked back once. She stood alone in the dust, hand raised in a small wave. No tears, no collapse, only a woman upright in the place she had quietly sacrificed. The road curved, and she disappeared. Tund leaned back, heart racing with the thrill of escape. He did not know the cost. He did not understand what she meant. He misunderstood that sentence. Tund changed the way he spoke, the way he dressed, and eventually the people he allowed close enough to know him. At first the changes were small, almost invisible even to himself. He listened more than he talked, studying how other students shaped sentences, softened vowels, chose when to laugh. The first time someone complimented his English, he felt a quiet relief that lasted all day. By the second semester, he no longer translated thoughts from childhood language before speaking. Words came out cleaner, smoother, stripped of the village that once lived inside them. He bought shirts that kept their shape and heat, shoes that didn't slap the ground, a watch he couldn't quite afford, but wore because details opened doors faster. He learned to shake hands firmly without holding too long, to smile without revealing too much, to speak about ambition in a tone that sounded natural instead of desperate. People stopped asking where he was from, or rather, they asked differently. Which part of Lagos? What does your family do? He noticed he preferred those questions, so he answered with careful edits. First he mentioned city relatives before the village, then eventually he stopped mentioning the village at all. When it slipped into conversation, he called it vaguely, that place, with a polite half-smile. The words felt harmless, easier than explaining open markets, cracked paint, generators at night, easier than explaining a mother who spoke love more fluently than grammar. Friends accepted the version he offered. By graduation, he no longer noticed how much he had rearranged his own history, only the results. Internships becoming offers, supervisors remembering his name, invitations into rooms where floors reflected light and the air smelled expensive. Success came gradually, then all at once. An office in Lagos, a business card, a desk with his name printed correctly. He moved apartments twice in 2 years, security, then elevator, then a receptionist who greeted him first. He called home less often, first because he was busy, then because silence became habit. Conversations shortened to practical questions and promises to visit soon. Months stretched into seasons. His mother never complained, always asked if he had eaten, always ended with a prayer. He always hung up feeling something he refused to name. Then Ada entered his life, confident in the way of someone raised around stability, laughter never checking if it was allowed. She liked order, plans, futures that looked good in photographs. Around her he felt aligned with the world he had worked to enter. They met through friends, then habit, then intention. She liked that he listened carefully before answering. He liked that she expected him to belong beside her without question. Introductions multiplied, dinners, weddings, family friends, and each new circle required a consistent story, and consistency required omission. Where is your family based? She asked once while they drove. Outside the city, he said. Will they come for the holidays? Maybe later. They prefer quiet places. She accepted it. Most people do when the tone is steady. Over time her questions grew natural, not suspicious. What his mother thought of her, whether they should visit before engagement, what traditions to prepare. Each one pressed gently against a wall he built long ago, and each time he guided the conversation elsewhere, travel dates, jokes, half-answers. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment, a moment that never came. The truth was simpler. Every version of his Lagos life had no space prepared for his mother. The proposal happened in a restaurant overlooking water, lights trembling like quiet applause. Ada said yes before he finished. People clapped softly. Dessert arrived unasked. For a moment he felt complete. Then planning began, lists, venues, expectations layered carefully. Your side will handle the elders' blessings, Ada said while reviewing notes. He nodded. And your mother, she added gently. I want to meet her properly before the ceremony. It feels important. The word hung there, important. He imagined her sitting here, the way silence might stretch after certain words. Not because she was wrong, but because his world required smooth edges and she was truth without polish. He pictured glances guests would try to hide, remembered laughter from a hot schoolyard echoing into adulthood. He slept poorly that night. By morning he convinced himself of something that sounded responsible. He told Ada his mother preferred small gatherings. That travel was difficult. That formal introduction at the ceremony itself would be simpler. Ada hesitated, then trusted him. The decision settled quietly, absence designed carefully enough to look like circumstance. He reviewed the guest list. Names filled the pages, people matching the life he stood inside. One name was missing. He closed the file and exhaled, framing it as protection from awkwardness, misunderstanding, from a moment that might change how others saw the woman he loved and how they saw him. He told himself he was preserving harmony, preserving dignity, preserving the future he had built piece by piece. Tund believed he was protecting what came next. She heard about the engagement through someone else. Not a phone call from her son. Not excitement shared at the beginning of a new chapter. It came the way news reaches women who live quietly at the edge of other people's lives, through polite-sounding gossip. A neighbor returned from the market and said casually, "Ah, Mama Tund. Congratulations, oh. I heard your son has done introduction in Lagos." The words landed like dust, then sank. She paused over the beans she was sorting, one hand frozen mid-motion. "Introduction?" she repeated slowly. The neighbor smiled helpfully. "Yes, big one. I saw pictures on somebody's phone. Plenty people. Pictures, proof not just of celebration, but of who was allowed to stand close enough to matter." She thanked her quietly and returned to her beans, fingers moving steady while her heart did not. That night she tried to call him. Once, twice. The line rang and cut. She tried again in the morning, telling herself the network was bad, that he was busy, that the world was simply loud. By afternoon she understood. He wasn't silent because he lacked time, but because she wasn't part of the story he wanted told. She did not cry. Long ago she learned crying fed no one and changed nothing pride had already decided. In the village people talked. Some admired. "Your son has made it." Others envied. Some whispered cruel curiosity. How can a son do engagement without his mother? Maybe she offended him. Maybe she's not the real mother. She answered none of it, kept sweeping her step, going to market, living unchanged while her place in the world quietly shifted. At night she sat on her bed staring at the wall, because imagining his face deciding she didn't belong hurt more than emptiness. She remembered her blessing. "Make sure your life is bigger than this place." Now she wondered if he heard "bigger" as further away, or "without you." A week before the ceremony, a cousin called from Lagos. "Mama, traditional wedding soon. Big people." Silence followed. The cousin hesitated. They didn't send invite, maybe mistake? She thanked him and ended the call, sitting still a long time, not weak, but deciding what kind of mother she would be. Some would shout, curse, or arrive to prove a point. But she was raised by sacrifice, and sacrifice does not argue. It acts. She decided she would go. Not to fight or shame him, to bless him. Because she could not live knowing she let her son enter marriage without a mother's prayer, simply because pride was wounded. She prepared quietly, washed her wrapper by hand, ironed it carefully, cleaned her sandals as new as they could look. She had no money for new clothes, and new cloth would not change minds already decided. What she could bring was meaning. The night before leaving, she opened the old tin box beneath her bed, the place for documents, letters, coins, pieces of a life still holding value. Inside were bundles of naira folded tight, saved slowly over years from good days and simple meals, protected so blessings would never arrive empty-handed. She counted carefully, sealed it in a brown envelope, hands trembling not from age but pain she would not show. At dawn she packed a small cloth bag. She was not coming to stay, not to beg space, only to do what mothers do even, when sons forget. She stood before the mirror, not wealth, not Lagos elegance work, endurance, love that never gets photographed. She adjusted her headscarf, whispered a prayer for him, lifted the envelope to her chest as if holding it could keep her heart from breaking. She carried the savings of her entire life in that envelope. We returned to the ceremony. The compound glowed with color and expectation. Layers of aso-ebi shimmering under late afternoon sun. Gold gel catching light as women leaned together in soft laughter. Drums played gently beneath conversation, steady enough to mark memory without interrupting it. Tund stood near the ceremonial gifts table, greeting relatives he barely knew but welcomed warmly, his practiced smile reinforcing the version of himself he had perfected, composed, successful, untouched by the rough edges he came from. Ada's family moved easily through the space, voices confident, posture certain. Everything felt balanced, organized, predictable, until the balance shifted. At first it was only a ripple, heads turning toward the entrance. A pause between drumbeats stretching too long. Someone adjusting in their seat, unsure whether to speak. Then she appeared. She walked slowly, not dramatic, just steady, as if she had every right to cross the open space between strangers. Her wrapper was simple, carefully cleaned but worn by years. In her hand she held a small brown envelope against her chest. Some guests assumed she was a village relative, others thought she was lost. No one greeted her because no one wanted to claim her first. Ada sensed the tension before seeing it. She followed people's gaze and frowned, leaning toward her cousin. "Do you know her?" The cousin shook her head. Older women near the elders stiffened slightly, not offended yet, just unsettled by uncertainty. Tun saw her the same moment the drums faded. For a second his mind rejected what stood before him. The distance between Lagos and his past had felt permanent. He had planned carefully so the two worlds would never collide. But there she was, his mother, standing inside the life he constructed to exclude her. His throat tightened. Every sound became distant and loud at once. He neither approached nor retreated, trapped between recognition and denial. He imagined questions forming in people's minds, connections escaping his control. Ada watched his face change before understanding. Her smile faded. "Tund, who is that?" He opened his mouth, but silence answered. His mother stepped closer, expression calm, gentle, the same look she wore when he feared storms as a boy. She looked only at him, not the crowd or decorations or expectations pressing in. She did not accuse. She did not embarrass. She simply existed in undeniable truth. Elders murmured softly. Ada's parents exchanged polite but strained glances. Ceremony requires clear roles. This moment had none. Ada acted, voice controlled yet firm, trying to restore order she didn't understand. "This area is for family," she said, gesturing gently toward the exit. The words landed harder than intended. Some guests looked down. Others pretended not to hear. Tund felt the moment stretch, the fragile space where one sentence could shape everything. He knew what he should do: speak, step beside her, claim her before anyone questioned. Instead he hesitated. Claiming her meant exposing what he hid, letting the past stand beside the future he promised Ada, surrendering control over how the day would be remembered. So he stayed silent. His mother's eyes remained patient on him, waiting not for the crowd's acceptance, but her son's recognition. Seconds passed. Drums did not resume. Laughter did not return. Even the air seemed to pause, waiting for him to choose which life he would stand inside. Ada looked again, confusion turning to hurt. "Tund?" She whispered. He did not answer. And in that quiet, surrounded by celebration and witnesses, he allowed the woman who gave him his name to stand alone. That was the worst moment of his life. A relative spoke. Not loudly at first, but the way truth enters a gathering when someone can no longer tolerate a polite lie. He was an older man from Tun's father's side, gray threaded through his beard, Adbada heavy on his shoulders, standing near the elders with the posture of someone tired of watching families break quietly. He looked at Ida's family, then the guests, then Tun. "You are telling her to leave," he said calmly, "because you don't know who she is." The compound fell so silent, even fabric sounded loud. Ada straightened, embarrassed and defensive. "Sir, he raised a hand gently. "No, let me speak." He turned toward the woman standing soaked in humiliation yet dignified, envelope pressed to her chest. "This is Mama Tund," he said clearly. "The woman who raised him." Gasps rippled. Ada's face shifted from confusion to shock as she searched Tun's face for denial, but his mouth stayed closed. The older man continued, voice heavier than loud. "You see that man in suit and pride? He did not become that by magic." He stepped closer to Ada's parents. "While he was in school, this woman sold pepper in the market, carried loads on her head, endured insults because she was poor." He paused, letting the image settle. "And when he gained admission, she did what many mothers cannot." Tun's stomach tightened. Ada's mother blinked slowly. Her father's jaw hardened. The man pointed toward the sunlit ground. She sold the last land his father left, the only thing they could have used to survive later. Whispers moved like wind. Tun's heart slammed. No, he would have known. He would have. His thoughts searched for air, but the man's face held only weary truth. She never told him, he said, as if answering Tun's mind. She wanted him to leave with courage, not guilt. Ada's hand rose to her mouth. Tun stared at the ground. And after all that? He stopped calling her. The crowd exhaled disappointment, quiet clicks of tongues, shaking heads. Sweat gathered at Tun's neck. He couldn't lift his head. Ada stepped forward slightly, voice trembling. Tund, is this true? He wanted to deny it, but truth had already grown teeth. His mother still hadn't spoken, and that silence broke something inside Ada first. Guilt usually comes with excuses, anger, defense. But this woman fought for nothing she should never have needed to fight for. Ada turned to her softly. Mama, the woman met her eyes, calm, deep, almost kind. Then her fingers loosened. The brown envelope slipped. It dropped corner first onto the dirt with a small paper sound, yet the crowd reacted as if something fragile shattered. Tund flinched. Ada moved before pride stopped her, bending to pick it up. It was heavier than expected. As she lifted it, the flap opened. Folded bills slid out, old, carefully stacked, and a worn paper followed, creased from being unfolded 100 times. She tried only to stop the money spilling, but the paper fell face up. A receipt. Faded school fee receipt, stamped and dated years ago, the name still clear. Tund Adeyemi. Her breath caught. She scanned the numbers, stamp, amount, the look of a paper kept because it marked the greatest sacrifice of a life. Another receipt slipped out, then another. Proof stacked thin as air, but heavy as truth. Her hand shook not from fear, but from the sudden shift in who she believed her fiancé was. This was no longer gossip, not accusation. Evidence, a mother's life pressed flat into paper. Ada lifted her gaze to Tund, still silent, still unmoving, still allowing the woman before everyone to stand alone. Her eyes filled not with tears, but clarity that aged her in an instant. She realized before he did, the woman had not come to cause trouble. She came to give, one last time, and the man she was about to marry had been ready to let her leave as if she meant nothing. Ada understood it before Tund. The crowd changed, not with shouting, not with chaos, but with silence. A heavy silence that falls when admiration turns into disappointment in a single breath. Moments earlier they measured fabric, wealth, posture. Now they measured character. No one rushed Tund. No one insulted him. They simply looked at him differently, and that was worse. Older women who admired his composure folded their arms. Men who praised his success stopped nodding. Ada's father straightened his shoulders like a man reconsidering a decision. Even the drummers kept their hands resting on instruments that no longer felt right to play. The ceremony had not ended, but something inside it had. Tund finally lifted his head expecting anger, accusation, something he could defend against. Instead he found faces that had already decided. And in the center stood his mother, upright, composed, asking nothing. Ada stepped back slowly, receipts trembling in her hands. Not furious but wounded at realizing she had nearly built a life with a man who could erase the woman who built him. Tund, she said quietly, say something. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. For the first time there was no polished version of himself, only a boy in a courtyard pretending not to know the woman calling his name. And now the courtyard had grown larger with more witnesses. He stepped forward slowly. The dust felt heavier beneath his shoes. He looked at her fully, saw lines that weren't there before, hands trembling from holding steady, the carefully ironed wrapper, the open envelope revealing everything. His throat burned. Mama, the word felt unfamiliar. The crowd leaned in without moving. I didn't know. It sounded weak even to him. Not knowing didn't erase silence or excuse letting her stand alone. She watched him carefully, no anger in her eyes, and that frightened him more. "I am sorry," he said, voice cracking. "I am sorry for not calling, for not coming back. For today." The apology hung fragile in the air. She stepped closer. He braced for rebuke, but she only lifted her hand and placed her palm against his cheek, the same cheek she once cleaned before school, the same face she watched grow proud. "You are my son," she said gently. Not why, not how, just that. Her thumb brushed his skin. "I did not sell land for you to be small inside. I did not suffer for you to forget who you are." Soft words, heavy truth. He expected punishment, distance. Instead, she protected him from his own shame. The crowd saw it. She had not come to destroy him, but to bless him. Ada stepped forward again, eyes wet now, and bowed slightly. "Mama," she said softly, and the title shifted the air. Tund looked at Ada, waiting for judgment, but silence had already spoken. No applause, no cheer, only witnesses to pride unraveling. Tund dropped to his knees, not by tradition, but because standing felt dishonest. Dust clung to his expensive trousers. "I am ashamed," he said, not of her, but of himself. She did not step back. She placed both hands on his head, steady, grounding. "I forgive you," she said. That was when he broke. Forgiveness left nowhere to hide. If she shouted, he could argue. If she cursed it, he could defend. If she turned away, he could blame pride. But she gave grace, and grace revealed the size of his failure. The crowd needed no words. Silence had spoken, and the weight of her mercy pressed heavier than any insult ever could. That was worse. She placed her hands on her son's head, not as performance, not as victory, but like a mother returning something sacred to where it belonged. Tund stayed on his knees, shoulders trembling, breath uneven, dust clinging to his trousers like a mark he didn't deserve to brush away. Around them the ceremony hung suspended, decorations bright, food warm, chairs filled, yet joy had stepped aside for something heavier. Her fingers spread gently across his hairline, rough palms warm and familiar in a way that cut deeper than memory. She leaned closer, voice low yet felt by everyone. "I didn't come for respect," she said softly. "I came because I am your mother." He shut his eyes tight, wanting to speak, to cling to her ankles like a child, to rewind to every moment he chose wrong. The courtyard, the unanswered calls, the guest list missing one name, but time does not bend for regret. She lifted her hands and stepped back slowly. She didn't wait for applause or for anyone to beg her to stay. She hadn't come to be begged. She came to bless him, and she had done it. Ada stood nearby, receipts folded carefully now, holding evidence of love she had almost misjudged. She looked at the older woman with new eyes, no longer measuring status but sacrifice. Words hovered on her lips, but respect that arrives late often comes quietly. The mother bent to pick up the envelope, sliding the scattered notes back inside with patient fingers, sealing it the way a woman seals things she cannot afford to spill, firmly, without drama. Then she held it out to her son. Tund's hands rose hesitantly, as if afraid the moment might vanish. The envelope felt heavier than money. It carried dawn mornings, market heat, whispered prayers over a sleeping child. She did not smile, but her eyes softened. "Live well," she said. "Be kind," simple words, the kind mothers give when they refuse to chain their children to guilt, even when guilt is earned. She turned and walked away, unhurried, composed, the way she had always carried hardship. Guests shifted instinctively to make space. Some bowed their heads. Some murmured greetings they should have offered earlier. A few pressed palms to their chests in silent acknowledgement. No one stopped her. They understood she wasn't leaving rejected, she was leaving finished. At the edge of the canopy she paused once, not for the crowd but for her son. Tund knelt with the envelope pressed to his chest like both wound and gift, face wet, eyes hollowed by truth. For the first time he looked smaller, not in potential, but in pride. She nodded once, a blessing without ornament, then stepped beyond decorations and silent drums. beyond a celebration that no longer felt celebratory, until the compound swallowed her into memory. Tund finally stood, but not as the polished man who arrived earlier. He stood exposed. Guests remained, chairs remained, a future still waited. Ada stood near, love and caution balanced in her gaze. Elders stayed seated, thoughtful, their silence reminding him that respect is not inherited, it is protected. He stared at the ground a long time. In Lagos, he always knew the next move. Here, success offered no instruction. Only truth did. And in the stillness left by his mother's footsteps, he was no longer the man they celebrated. He was only a son,